Hello, everyone. How y'all doing? My name is Pastor Sean Brooks, and I have my dear friend with me, Minister Lakeisha Jones, who is also a grief counselor, and she will be speaking with us on today. We just want to dialogue with you all just a little bit about grief, the effects of it, and things like that. But before we get started, Lakeisha, just tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you got into this field, and things of that nature.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, whichever time you're listening to this. Again, my name is Lakeisha Jones. I am a licensed and ordained minister, but I'm also a licensed social worker. I got into this field pretty much, I did not choose the field of social work. It chose me when I was a young child, and one of my summer camp best friends came to me with a incident that occurred with them the night before, and I sprung into action, doing everything that I could to help them get into a healthy situation. And just since then, I've kind of been helping people.
Awesome. So I am so excited because today you was able to bless us with a grief session, and it was so dynamic, man. We learned a lot of information, and I just thought it was so important that we bring it to those that were not able to make it. Mm-hmm. So when we talk grief, what's the stigma behind it? I mean, why is it that people don't like to talk about it? I mean, things of that nature. I mean, just share a little bit of what you have experienced and why it's so important that we talk about grief.
It's important to talk about grief because grief is not just limited to death. The stigma is that grief is only related to death, but we grieve various things in various different ways. But it's also important to talk about it because a lot of people think when it's concerning death that once we've gotten past the funeral or the homegoing celebration, that we're supposed to move on and go back to life as normal and be happy and okay again. And that is not the norm for everyone, because once you experience a loss, that grieving process is continuous. It just looks different over the course of time, but active grief doesn't ever really go away.
So I understand grief, and I also understand how it affects people, but it affects everybody differently. How does that look? Can you share a little bit of that and some of the things that we can possibly look for as we are grieving?
Yes, it definitely affects everyone differently. You have some individuals who will be very emotional. They may cry and not have a real understanding as to why they're crying. You also may have some individuals that will isolate themselves and will withdraw, and they may have been an outgoing individual previously. Then you also have situations where individuals will engage in harmful behavior, such as the overuse of alcohol. It could be, using prescription medications improperly, and it can also be indulging in illegal substances as well. So it's definitely important to pay attention to that, but it's not just limited to that. It can also be a person kind of engulfing themselves in different activities to kind of, it looks like they're avoiding. So they may avoid places, they may avoid things, or they may push themselves into doing more. So it could be a person that has usually had a really good balance with work, and now all of a sudden they're enmeshed in their work. They're always working late hours, which is a form of avoided behavior.
Wow. So would that also be considered like camouflage grief? People
Absolutely.
are hiding their work, hiding grief by the things that they're doing and things of that nature. Wow. Now, from my limited understanding, my limited research, I understand that there are like 6 different types or stages of grief. Can you share a little bit about those and what that looks like as well?
Yes, the 6 standard stages of grief are denial, and then you have anger, bargaining, you have depression, and acceptance. And so the thing of it is with the stages of grief, they don't always happen in any particular order. and they can restart at any time. So it is definitely important to know that the stages of grief are just there to serve kind of as an understanding and a guide of what a person can be experiencing as they're going through grief. But grief is not linear. So just because you have the stages of grief, it doesn't mean an individual or a family is going to go through each stage in a specific time frame. So it doesn't mean that in a week after a death or a loss that an individual is going to go through denial, but by week 2 they should be in anger or anything like that. It just means that they're going to go through these different emotions. Possibly they can miss an emotion or they can hit all of them. It just depends on the individual and how they're processing through their experience with that loss.
And that's awesome because even myself, within the last 3 months, I have experienced 4 losses, 3 of which were very close to me, and the 4th just being a classmate. So within 4 months of this new year, I have experienced loss, and I had to find ways to deal with it, talk about it, and accept it. So is acceptance a part of it, or how do we get through grief, or how do we continue to work through it when you have so many multiple losses?
Well, first I want to say I'm extremely sorry for your loss and for the loss of anyone that may be listening. Loss is definitely difficult. And do we get to a place of acceptance at some point? Yes. We do get to a place of acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean that we like it or that we're okay with the loss. It just means that we recognize that the loss has occurred and there's nothing that we can do to change it. And part of how we get there is therapy. Therapy is one of the best options that we can use. And, the unfortunate part is a lot of people do not like to utilize therapy for the simple fact that they think that going to therapy means that they're weak. Going to therapy may mean that they lack faith. But the Bible tells us that faith without works is dead, and prayer is a part of our faith. But the works is going to require the actions that we take to get to the place that we want to be. And oftentimes that includes therapy. And when we go to therapy, the misconception is that you're going to be diagnosed with some type of disorder or mental health issue. And that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes when a person is dealing with grief, they may have a diagnosis for the sake of, just going through the process that they're going through that's called adjustment disorder. But that just means that that person is adjusting to some things and they're needing some support to adjust through that. It doesn't mean that they're weak. It doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to do the things that they need to do. It just simply means that they need some assistance processing through what they need to process through. And the therapist is there to support them through that process. That therapy session is their session. It is not for the therapist to tell them how to feel, when to feel, or where to feel, but it's just for them to help process through their experience and what they're going through and how they're feeling, so that they have someone that's non-judgmental and they're an objective party to be able to help them through that process. So I always recommend therapy. Of course, we want to also tap into the support services with our leaders within the church, but we also want to keep in mind that not everyone is equipped to help individuals through grief and loss. So we want to make sure we're tapping into individuals who have the proper expertise, because when we experience loss, it is not just the experience of losing that person, but it is also the loss or the bringing up of the different things that may be associated with that person and the relationship that we've had with them.
Awesome. And I don't want to just make people think that grief is just loss, but grief could be other things as well, correct?
Absolutely.
Right, because a lot of times we get into that mindset where I'm grieving because I lost a loved one. But some of the things you shared this morning that I thought was very fascinating was the fact that you enlightened me that it's more than just loss. It could be a period of adjustment that you got to go through, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
And that could cause us to grieve. So can you just share a little bit about how it is not just the loss of, but there could be an adjustment period of some different things?
Yes. So Right now, we've been in the midst of a pandemic, so there's been a lot of adjustment that's had to be made. So the adjustment is not just made on the part of the adults, but even our youth have had to make the adjustment. They've had to go from having an in-person learning environment to a virtual format. We've had to go from working in an in-person working environment to a virtual format. That's an adjustment. College students have, when you actually high school students, when they graduate, they go through a grief and loss period because they have to adjust from being around the same friends that they grew up with and have known for years and years to now they're going to college on a different end of the world, meeting new people and not sure they're going to fit in and trying to figure out who they are in that space and in that process. The adjustment can also be getting promoted. Going to school, whether it is for the first time directly out of high school or after years of being out of high school. Adjustments come in so many different ways. One of the adjustments that I pointed out this morning was even when your children move out of your home, going through that empty nester syndrome, whereas parents, we're excited to see our children spread their wings and fly on their own, we still miss them. We miss what we're used to doing to take care of them. So that is it is a loss that we're experiencing, and there is a grieving period that can sometimes come with that. I, as a mother, was excited when my daughter was moving out on her own, but at the same time, I missed her as well and having her around. So it's a lot of different adjustments that we go through, and true loss is not just death. Loss can be the loss of a job, and it may not be the loss of a job because you were terminated from that position. It could be because you got promoted and you've moved on to something else, but you can still grieve certain things. In ministry, I remember when I became a minister and was beginning to fully operate as a minister, I grieved certain things because then I no longer was in the choir. I was no longer on the praise dance ministry because my time and my efforts needed to be focused elsewhere based on the calling that God had placed on my life. And there was a grieving process in that moment because I grieved, not being in the choir and singing with the choir. And even though I still sing when they're singing from the pews or from the pulpit, depending on the situation that day, it's still not the same as what I had been accustomed to at that time.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. So when we talk grief, and as you mentioned, just the fact that we are able to have this dialogue that we're having, why is it so important that we find not only a therapist, but maybe a close relative, a friend, your homeboy, maybe one of your closest girlfriends? I mean, why is it important that we have those individuals that we can be able to talk these things through?
It's extremely important to talk through things because sometimes we'll isolate, and when we isolate ourselves or we hold things in, we keep them bottled in, it will find its way to resurface in other ways. So it may resurface by way of anger or frustration because we've keeping it bottled up, and we may take it out on our children, we may take it out on our coworkers, we could take it out on a total stranger. But actively talking about what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, can help you to kind of process through it. And sometimes just saying out loud what you're dealing with can help you yourself come up with solutions. And everything is not necessarily solution driven. Some things you just have to get out and just hear it and process it and say it out loud, because if we keep it to ourselves, maybe it's not real. But once we say it out loud, we actually give life to it. And when we give life to it, we now know how to deal with that life of that situation. So it is extremely important to have somebody that you can talk to, somebody that is non-judgmental, somebody that's not going to tell you that you're quote unquote crazy for feeling the way that you're feeling or thinking the way that you're thinking, but someone who will help you process through what you're feeling and what you're thinking. And even if that thought is that you don't want to be here anymore, or if that thought is that you want to harm yourself, someone who you can confide in that can help get you to the resources that are available to you.
That is so awesome. So I hope I'm not holding you too long. It's just great information, man. I mean, I think it's important that we talk this and we get it out because, we all experience grief at some point in some time. I mean, from something as simple as the seasons changing can cause some types of grief.
Absolutely.
In particular, now that we are in the spring season with the pollen that's falling and people have allergies and stuff like that. So it's not always the loss, or it's not always the obvious things, but some people can have different reactions or things of that nature just because of the seasons changing. So I really appreciate your time and your effort. And for the people that's watching or that's going to be watching, I hope that today, with Lakeisha and myself, that you're able to not only hear what we're saying, but talk about it. Share this information with your loved ones, your family, your friends, and most important, talk to your kids. One of the things that was shared this morning in this session was that a couple of the studies have shown that even for little kids, if they lost their toy and you just simply replaced the toy that was lost, how that child can even themselves experience grief.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it's important that we talk about these things and that we do not use a blanket and just everyone's the same, because as you shared this morning, you can talk about it a little more, that even though we may have experienced, both of our kids may have passed away, or we both may have lost a job, your grief and my grief may be different, but it's the same event has happened.
Absolutely.
Amen?
Yes.
Good.
Amen. And that's important to know and understand, because oftentimes we think, if we look at parents who have lost a child, and when those parents have lost a child, the expectation is if one parent moves on or is getting better with their grief, the other parent they should be moving at the same process or the same speed. But the reality of it is grief is not linear, and it's going to be experienced differently by each individual. And granted, they were both the parent to that child, but both of them had a different relationship with that child and are going to experience grief, and that loss means something different to each of them. And we have to respect that. We never want to tell people that, okay, it's been X amount of time, it's time for you to get over it. Especially when we think about losing parents and losing children, or any loved one for that matter, because yeah, it could be 10 years since you lost your loved one, but every Mother's Day could be a reminder that your mother passed away. Every Father's Day could be a reminder that your father passed away. Every birthday, every milestone that you make, every achievement that you have can be a reminder that they're not here to celebrate and share that with you, which can take you back through the grieving process. And as what was stated this morning about with a child losing a toy, as parents, sometimes when we're replacing that toy, we're not teaching the child to process through loss. The loss doesn't have to just be that of another human being. It could be the loss of a pet. A child loses, their goldfish dies, and we don't tell them the goldfish dies. We replace it with a new goldfish so they never know. Or if the dog dies, we tell them the dog ran away instead of actually letting them know that the dog died, and allowing them to process through that grief. So the goal for therapy is to help people to process through grief in a healthy manner. We're going to experience grief. That's inevitable. We cannot avoid grief, because we're going to experience loss, whether it is death, whether it is loss of a job, whether it is, loss of an achievement or not, fulfilling an achievement. One of the things that was mentioned was about managing our expectations. We have to make sure we manage our expectations. Sometimes we end up in relationships, whether that's a romantic relationship, a marriage, or a friendship, or we even have educational expectations that we set for ourselves. And if we don't meet the markers that we have set for ourselves, we become disappointed and frustrated, and we're going through a grieving process. But we have to give ourselves grace to know that everything is not going to always happen in the way that we planned or in the way that we thought or imagined it would, and that's okay. And one other thing I want to point out too is that I want everyone that is listening to know that it is okay to not be okay. It is not a sign of weakness if you are not okay and you need support. It is not a sign of weakness if you're struggling in a period of grief. That is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength to say, hey, I need some help. Hey, I need someone to talk to. Hey, I need to go to therapy. So I want you to walk in that strength and tap into the resources that are available to you. Thank you.
And as you talk about being strong and not thinking that it's weak to talk about this, particularly our leaders. So if there are any leaders out there watching this, please be mindful that as leaders, we also can let it be known that we are not okay. I know we are taught to be strong, and I know we are taught to be, the leaders. But it's okay for us not to be strong at moments of times in our life. And so we just want to take this opportunity to say thank you once again, Sister Lakeisha Jones. We want to thank you. And before we leave, how can an individual that may be watching this, how can they get the information, get the resources? Who do they talk to if they don't have a family member, don't have a friend that they trust, or just want to talk to a therapist? Is there a place they can go to? Now, I know yourself, you have Purpose Healing.
Yes.
But if they, and you're located in Prince George?
Yes, I'm located in Prince George. I'm currently only providing virtual support, but you can find that information and schedule an appointment and get the contact number through Purposed, P-U-R-P-O-S-E-D, Healing, LLC.com. But also, in addition to Purposed Healing, you have, you can Google a therapist near me or a counselor near me to find someone, and you can call, and many accept insurance. So a lot of people don't want to go to therapy because they think it's going to be very expensive, but therapy is something that is actually covered through insurance. So you can actually tap into that, and if you don't want to utilize your insurance, we do have self-pay options at various, my colleagues and myself take self-pay options. So it's extremely important, but also you can talk to your primary care manager when you go to your doctor's appointments, whether it's a physical appointment or a virtual appointment, and they can give you some recommendations for therapy as well.
Well, thank you so much. And your particular phone number, do you have a phone number or that they can reach out to you? And then you may, if they can't use you, maybe you can direct them somewhere else. Is there a office number or anything that they can contact you with?
Yes, I have two numbers. If they're looking to schedule directly with me, they can call 757-654-3194, option 0. And if they want to speak directly to me, they can dial option 702. And both numbers are the way to be able to get a hold to me to ask questions. Of course, dialing option 0, you'll be able to find out there by speaking with our administrative assistant to determine if we accept your insurance. And if not, you can reach out directly to me. You can also email me at hello@purposedhealingllc.com and field your questions that way. And I do get back to people within a 24 to 48 hour turnaround.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And anyone that's watching this, we encourage you. We reached out to Miss Lakeisha Jones ourselves for our church and our church members, and she came in and done an awesome job, and I thank you so very much. So we as a church, as an organization, thought that it was important that she came in and just talked to us about grief. And also, before we leave, can you just talk a little bit about this post-pandemic era that we're going to be going into, and why is that so important that we gear ourselves up to prepare for the post-pandemic as well as us being in the pandemic?
Absolutely. Over the course of the pandemic, we've experienced a lot of trauma. We have had an enormous amount of deaths that have taken place, of whether it's been people that we know, people we do not know. We have seen a lot of things such as the police killings of innocent persons or unarmed persons, and so a lot of different things that have been happening. Plus, we have had an increase in child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assaults. So as a result, all of these layers of trauma that have been experienced over the course of the pandemic, and that's just to name some of the things. That's not to name what individuals are dealing with. So post-pandemic, we're looking at somewhere between 3, 5, 7, and maybe even beyond years of work in therapy sessions to be able to uncover some of the experiences that people have dealt with. And this pandemic has given people the ability to slow down and even come to a complete stop and have to face some things that they've been able to avoid because they've been busy with the hustle and bustle of life. So it is important that we are getting into therapy and we're dealing with all of the traumas that we've experienced, because as a nation, as a world, we have experienced a lot of trauma over the past year, and it is definitely trauma that we cannot allow to go unmanaged and undealt with.
Awesome, awesome. So once again, we thank all of you for taking the time to listen in to us. Once again, we are at Greater Works Christian Fellowship, and you can also contact us by way of our website, which is gwcfellowship.com, and we will also be able to link you to Miss Lakeisha Jones as well. So we want you to have every opportunity in every aspect to be able to get the healing, to be able to get the therapy, and to be able to get the information and knowledge that you need. So let's not think about it as something that somebody else goes through, but take the ownership for yourself. So once again, Ms. Lakeisha, what's that phone number that they can get in contact with you again? And we're going to sound off with this last information.
757-654-3194, option 0 to schedule an appointment.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much. We love you. And at any time, you can locate us, 1668 South Sycamore Street in the city of Petersburg. God bless you all. And once again, Sister Lakeisha, thank you for your time and thank you for this information.
Thank you for the honor.